Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the free webinar by the International CPTED Association. We shall be starting now. Our topic today is street crime and antisocial behavior and how CPTED relates to it. And today we have an amazing session. We have got an amazing group of panelists as well. We have John Goldsworthy all the way from Australia. We have Dr. Jerry J. Kano, the president of PCAP from the Philippines, and also myself, we are from Malaysia. So we are going to be having a very interesting session on how street crime and antisocial behavior can be reduced by using CPTED entirely. So not to take up too much time, we're just going to start this session today with a quick introduction video. And please do take your time. Just before we start, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this presentation are those of guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the position of the International CPTED Association. The ICA assumes no legal responsibility for the speaker's statement, and the ICA does not assume ownership of intellectual property, accuracy, or validity of presented information. So this is just a quick disclaimer before we begin our session today. But of course, starting up today's session on CPTED and crime prevention and antisocial behavior, we have all the way from the Philippines, Professor Dr. Jerry J. Kano, a very good friend of mine. He's also the president of the PCAP, Professional Criminologists Association of the Philippines. Professor Dr. Jerry J. Kano is also the Dean of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the Pinma Cagayan de Oro College. I hope I pronounced that right. So we have guests from all over the world today and speakers from different parts of the world today as well. And that is why it gives me great pleasure to introduce to everybody Dr. Jerry J. Kano, a good friend and a brother of mine. Please do take it away, Doctor.
Thank you, Brother Shamir. Good morning, John. Good morning, Shamir. Good morning, everyone, in this webinar. Brother Shamir, can you allow me to share the screen?
Yes, it's all yours. You can just click share.
Okay. I think you need to exit first the presentation. Okay. For a while. Can you see my screen? Brother Shamir, can you see my screen?
Perfect. Very clear.
Okay. Okay. For a while, okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this CPTED seminar, webinar on street crimes and antisocial behavior. I am Jerry Canio from the Philippines, representing the Professional Criminologists Association of the Philippines. This morning, I will be talking about the overview of CPTED, and of course, I would like to introduce the Professional Criminologists Association of the Philippines. I was informed that around 28 or 29 countries are joining us in this webinar, and we hope we could be able to somehow provide you better perspectives of CPTED and, of course, the practice of the criminology profession here in the Philippines. Okay, so the title of my presentation this morning here in the Philippines. I know it's not morning in some parts of the globe, but it's good morning here in the Philippines. The title of my presentation would be the Forging Partnership and Foreign Reciprocity in the Criminology Profession. So to begin with this presentation, allow me to provide you the overview, of course, and the criminology profession in the Philippines, the foreign reciprocity in the practice of the criminology profession, and of course, the intention of the Professional Criminologists Association of the Philippines to forge partnership with all associations or all organizations for that matter that is within the umbrella of public safety and national security. To begin with, CPTED for that matter, the crime prevention through environmental design, is a multidisciplinary approach in reducing crime, victimization, deterrence, and of course, the involvement and participation of the community. As early as 1961, Jane Jacobs, for that matter, a journalist, came up with a book that provided us the perspectives of urban design concepts that somehow prevents the crime victimization in the United States. Sometime in 1972, an architect Oscar Newman, also provide us the fundamental principles of CPTED defensible space. And also a criminologist Ray Jeffrey in 1971 laid out the environmental design through environmental design in this context. He laid out the basic and fundamental principle: how can one capitalize or take advantage of the environmental design in preventing crime and victimization. The CPTED, for that matter, has two generations. The first generation, as it carries the principles of crime prevention through environmental design, it talks about and deals about the territorial control, the natural surveillance based on the design, and of course, the image and the environment of the milieu, and of course, access control is also being considered. The second generation principles also include the social cohesion, and of course, community culture, connectivity, and the threshold capacity of a particular space or community. Basically, all of this can be capped into that great concept of environmental criminology, wherein all the facets, all the dimensions, and all the aspects for that matter is basically being captured by this great concept of environmental criminology. That is why we have invited a lot of educators in the Philippines and in other countries for that matter that talks about criminology, because this is one great concept as well as we promote the science and art of learning and studying criminology. The criminology profession in the Philippines, just a little backgrounder, the criminology profession in the Philippines is a college degree. It's a 4-year baccalaureate degree program, and it started here in the Philippines as early as 1954. Today, as I speak before you, the universities and colleges here in the Philippines that offers Bachelor of Science in Criminology program is now about 600, spread all over the country. Philippines today has about 110 million people, and that with around 600 colleges and universities that offer this program. In total, we have an enrollment in the tertiary or college level. We have around more than from first year college to fourth year college, we have more than 100,000 students studying and learning criminology. And criminology in the Philippines, for that matter, is basically governed by law. As early as 1972, we already have a law here in the Philippines that tends to regulate, that tends to require all graduates of criminology profession to take the licensure examination, because the Philippine government viewed criminology profession that needs government regulation, because this affects security and safety of lives and property, particularly here in the Philippines. Then sometime in 2018, this has been repealed, by a new law, Republic Act or RA 11131, wherein it provides and it captures everything about the criminology profession in this country, wherein the practice of criminology profession in this country involves and embraces all the dimensions of national security, public safety, peace and order, and also in nation building and development. So with this passage of the new law here in the Philippines, it's now beyond the concept of only crime prevention. It's beyond the concept of investigation, but even it captures national security and public safety for that matter. So I have here the extract of Section 2 of the law, which tells us that this is now the criminology profession in the Philippines, and that crime prevention is one of among the many interests of the criminologists here in the Philippines. And of course, this is now the foreign reciprocity program of the Philippines. And with that, by virtue of the mandate of the Philippine Criminology Profession Act of 2018, Republic Act 11131, this is now the law that governs in the practice of the criminology profession in the country, as well as foreigners who would like to practice criminology profession here in the Philippines. For example, in the dimension of crime prevention, very well, the Philippine government would welcome any foreign national, provided that all the mechanisms is being followed and satisfied. The Philippines also is engaging into mutual recognition arrangements in the practice of the profession. So whatever profession is that, the Philippine government may then give due recognition, and this is basically addressed to groups, to associations, to organizations, or even government, to government for that matter. So we can have mutual recognition arrangements in the practice of the criminology profession. We also have mutual recognition of professional qualification, and this goes beyond MRA. This is basically practiced by some other profession in the criminology, in the engineering, in the health and allied sciences. The mutual recognition of professional qualification is being practiced. This is to offer the free mobility of the practice of profession, not only in Southeast Asia, but basically to the world. And of course, Philippines is also pushing, together with Malaysia and all the members of the Southeast Asian countries, we are pushing also with the ASEAN Qualification Reference Framework, and that also provides the free mobility in the practice of profession within and among members of the ASEAN countries. And with that, the backbone here in the Philippines also with regards to the practice of the profession is the Philippine Qualification Framework, wherein the Philippine government has passed it into law under the Republic Act 10968. This now mandates all government instrumentalities, both government and private sector, is being governed by this law to follow the framework on qualifications among professionals, particularly in the practice of this profession. So our dimension, therefore, would like to make it the globe as our village in the mobility of a professional and the practice of our profession. So we somehow would like to engage all other countries joining in this webinar to join us and be part in this initiative in providing the free mobility of our professionals as they practice their respective profession. Now, the Professional Criminologists Association of the Philippines, I just would like to give a backgrounder on this association. This has been organized here in the Philippines in 1988. So it's been more than 30 years that we have this association in the Philippines. And this association basically promotes the practice of the criminology profession. And of course, it protects the interest of the criminologist as well. And we are pushing that majority, if not all, of our law enforcement agencies in the government will recognize criminology as the only germane academic program that provides the formal training and education. 4 years formal training and education with quality assurance mechanism of the Philippine government that is being given for you to be able to practice the profession. And this is the licensure exams to somehow be the basis in the recruitment of human resources in the police and in all other agencies dealing with public safety and national security. This is so because it provides more practicability sense in the part of the government, because the human resource that they will be taking is basically trained, educated in the dimensions and facets of national security and public safety. So we are looking forward that in a not too distant future, we will be able to see a law enforcement that is governed, run by criminologists in this country. And we hope we can also provide this kind of blueprint to other countries to somehow also influence your government and the private sector, that this kind of training can also best be articulated by providing formal education and training in the universities and in some colleges for that matter. That is why the Professional Criminologists Association of the Philippines, currently we have around more than 100,000 members here in the Philippines, and we would like to also invite foreign nationals to join us as member also of this association and be part of our fellowship in our learning and process of discovering new things, new knowledge in the aspects of criminology, forensic, security, safety, crime prevention, investigation, and research. So we would like to offer an open invitation to all association, to all individuals for that matter, who are present and joining in this webinar to be part in our association and somehow learn from us as we navigate in trying to influence government that this criminology as an academic program is basically the most essential requirement in the human resources needed in the different law enforcement agencies in the country that we have. So I think that's all. And if you have some questions, I would be very glad to respond to them. And I think the open forum will be opened by Shamir later after all the topics, and the speakers will be able to present their presentation. Thank you very much, and good morning here from the Philippines. Brother Shamir, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I shall share my screen. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Jerry Jekano, all the way from the Philippines. Salamat po. And we really appreciate having you here and sharing. And also, the International CPTED Association really appreciates working together with the PCAP. It's been a very easy collaboration. And also, we do hope that the participants today from different parts of the world, like Dr. Jerry just mentioned, we have about 28 different countries participating today. An amazing session, different parts of the world, different time zones. So we'd like to thank everyone for waking up at the wee hours of the morning to some of you and joining us. And some of you, it's very late at night at the moment. So we would like to really thank you for joining. Again, thank you very much to Dr. Jerry from the PCAP. And also, like was mentioned earlier, if there are any questions, please do keep them to the end of the webinar. We will be sharing with everyone. We will be answering those questions for sure. Okay. Now, just to move on a bit more, now that we have an overview of a little bit of the Philippines and the Criminologists Association and also the practices over there. Now we are going to go into another very great speaker, John Goldsworthy. He's the director of the International CPTED Association. John has an amazing, I would say, resume. You know, he's not only the director but also board member of the crime prevention community at the International Association of Chief and Police. He has an amazing decorated career of over 40 years in the Queensland Police Service, Australia, including over 10 years in the crime prevention unit and 9 years as a detective. He has a real passion for an extensive real-world experience in all aspects of crime prevention and community safety. One great thing about John is that his policing experience also includes first response policing, criminal investigation, internal investigation, close personal protection, counter-terrorism, and intelligence operations for major event security planning, air and maritime operations. With involvement spanning over 25 years, John was one of the pioneers of CPTED in Australia, including introducing the concept to government, community, and industry bodies. That's why it's just amazing to have John here, because now John, what he does now is that he designs and facilitates CPTED workshops and presentations and provide policy advice to support the community safety activities and professional development of government, urban design, planning, and allied professionals in the Asia Pacific region. So I'm going to hand it over to John. Please do take it away, and trust me, everybody, you are going to enjoy this. He's going to talk about antisocial behavior and how it relates to CPTED. Thank you very much, John. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Shamia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of the hundreds of participants here with us today. What a fantastic opportunity to talk about CPTED, and it's tremendous to share the screen with Shamia and Dr. Jerry. If I could just sort of have this as an opening slide, and we could ask ourselves the question, what sort of a world do we want to live in? And I think this wall that I took a photograph of a number of years ago says it all: encouraged, included, alive, and safe. And when you think about it, if where we are isn't safe, perhaps those other things don't matter so much. So this is how we want to feel: encouraged, included, alive, and safe. Today, I'd term it a shallow dive into the world of CPTED and antisocial behaviour. Obviously, CPTED is a very involved concept which many people have spent much of their working career dealing with. So today is just a shallow dive into the topic, but the areas I'm going to be talking about, first and foremost, what is CPTED? What is antisocial behaviour? Where does CPTED get involved in this? Implementing CPTED strategies with care, the importance of understanding the local context, some factors we need to consider before we start introducing CPTED strategies, some of the ongoing challenges we face in the world of community safety and crime prevention, and then at the end of it, basically just showing you a few photographs and talking to them in relation to some examples. So Dr. Jerry introduced some of the history of CPTED and how it came about and some of the early definitions. One of the contemporary definitions, or the contemporary definition of CPTED, comes from the International CPTED Association. And essentially, crime prevention for environmental design is a multidisciplinary approach of crime prevention that uses urban and architectural design and the management of built and natural environments. CPTED strategies aim to reduce victimisation, deter offender decisions that precede criminal acts, and build a sense of community amongst inhabitants so that they can gain territorial control of areas, reduce crime, and minimise their fear. So then, what is CPTED? Well, those of you who've studied CPTED and have been exposed to the concept before will recognise these. And essentially, and once again, a shallow dive into the concept, we're talking about territorial reinforcement, which is about essentially giving a place ownership, guardianship, showing pride and control in an area. Natural surveillance, the ability to see and be seen, but obviously the issue there we need to be aware of is not providing unwanted surveillance of vulnerable areas or activities. Access control, which is about facilitating or restricting the movement of people and vehicles over, through, and around space. And of course, all this needs to be in the context of a quality environment where the space is actively managed. And I believe it always was this way, but however now even more so, we need to consider inclusion as opposed to exclusion of people in our community. So then what is antisocial behaviour? Well, what amounts to antisocial behaviour really does depend upon the local context and what the expected or intended behaviour is at a location. There's elements of what the local culture will dictate as to what is expected or undesired behaviour, and also the law has a role to play. It can actually include behaviours that amount to substantive offences against local laws, but that's not necessarily so. One consideration when looking at the concept of antisocial behaviour is the negative impact on the legitimate users of that particular space. They're the people for which that space was designed, intended, constructed, and should be used. Another factor is, I'd call it the eye of the beholder, because certainly those of us who have been involved in government and police, sometimes people make complaints about certain behaviours. It's sort of a way to exert control over individuals or groups. So sometimes what I perceive as a certain sort of behaviour, others may not perceive that as a particular problem. And I suppose it really depends, as always with CPTED, the actual context and the effect that people are actually having. Now, some of these behaviours can include, and this is certainly not limited, offences against the person, from the relatively minor to the most extreme, vandalism or offences against property, graffiti, that is the unauthorised or unlawful graffiti as opposed to legitimate and approved street art, offensive, disorderly or disruptive behaviour, and another one there, illegitimate loitering, sometimes as a precursor to committing offences. So then why CPTED? My experience has been that there can be an emphasis on technical, that is CCTV or lighting, or an organised approach to crime prevention measures such as police and security as the solution when a community safety or crime risk is perceived. Now, certainly those strategies are very, very, very valid responses. However, one of the things we need to consider is that there is a clear understanding of what the actual problem is that we're dealing with, or is it just a symptom of a deeper problem? And of course, then we can go down the path of a problem-solving model. And many of you may be familiar with the SARA problem-solving model, which has certainly been one used for a long time in my policing experience. So we actually have to have a clear grasp of the problem, and then having identified the problem, we need to identify which of those things from the crime prevention toolbox we're going to use in a considered way to deal with that problem. Now, with CPTED, it's an approach, in my view, to crime prevention that's often overlooked and sometimes misunderstood. But clearly, CPTED involves an understanding about how changes to the environment can encourage desired behaviour and discourage undesired behaviour. It really involves understanding how human behaviour, the actual problem or problems, the local context, very important, consultation with stakeholders and engagement with them all comes together, and they're all vital factors. So, implementing CPTED strategies with care. In the race to eliminate undesired behaviours, make sure you don't create an environment that's counterproductive for the purpose for which it was intended, either intentionally or inadvertently, because the risk can be from perhaps not fully thought out implementation of strategies. We're actually creating a hostile environment where really nobody wants to go because they really don't feel comfortable there. So CPTED should be implemented with care. We have to consider the targeting of individual, not targeting individuals because of their attributes, rather their actual illegitimate or unlawful behaviours committed by them. So, it's about the behaviour. It's not about the attributes of particular groups. So we need to be careful about that. The goal we should always be striving for is to enhance the desired use of the place, and that should always be the principal consideration. As I mentioned earlier, the issue of inclusion of all members of the community and all parts of the community rather than exclusion. And the International CPTED Association has a code of ethics that its members and the practitioners within the ICA subscribe to. So I certainly encourage you to look at the International CPTED Association website, but also have a look at the code of ethics, and that will once again reinforce what we as an organisation and what CPTED is all about. Introduced this concept a little earlier, but it's vital that we actually understand the local context, because no two locations are identical. Even facilities of identical design, for example, what occurs around them or to the users within them will be influenced by a number of things, and they can include things such as the designated purpose or purposes of the location. The location may have a number of purposes. Also, another cue or another guide or another hint to what some of the potential issues could be is what that place was previously, because we don't always have the luxury to build things from the ground up when we have some activity that we need to undertake. Quite often we need to use or modify existing facilities or locations. So what a thing was before and how it was used in that fashion may be a cue to us in terms of the future. Obviously, the people who use that space, the users or users of that space, what happens there will be influenced by that, where it's actually located and what's around it, because what the issues that impact on a location will be influenced by the bordering activities. They could be potentially conflicting uses or user groups. They could be perhaps, say, on the line of desire between sort of the nighttime economy, the nightclubs, and a public transport hub. So therefore, if you have some sort of a facility that's on that line of desire, there's a pretty good chance that the things that happen at those other places may well transfer across to your location. Another factor to consider is day versus night use. And I'll talk about a little bit later about engagement with different stakeholders, but it's really vital that we look at the use of a space or a location across the full 24/7 spectrum, and that decision makers are aware of these factors as well. So, they're looking at it from how the world operates, and those of us who've worked, say, in the police or in other similar agencies, we know the world's a different place at night time when the sun goes down. So day versus night use is consideration is very critical. There's a range of different approaches to the same issues in the world. There's the world supply, if I could use that term, of different guidelines and principles around CPTED that exist around the world. In my experience, sometimes the challenge is the crossover between guideline and legislative requirement, where the guidelines promote what we would see as best practice for a safe community outcome in relation to development or planning, but there's not specifically, in many cases, a legislative requirement to follow that through. So it really depends on the organisation and the degree of uptake and the degree of focus that they have to try and really make those guidelines bite in the absence of a legislative requirement. CPTED, as I say, is not the panacea. It's not the magic bullet to solve all crime and community safety issues. It is, however, an important part of the crime prevention jigsaw puzzle. So, as I said, it's sometimes a concept which is misunderstood, but it is an important part, and I encourage people to fully understand what CPTED is and how it can be incorporated in concert with other strategies. Remember, if you learn and understand the rules and variations of the game, in this case CPTED, if you can learn and understand the rules well enough, you can play it on any field, because CPTED is very, very much about context and the local context. Some of the factors that we need to consider, particularly in the case of antisocial behaviour, is that we can have offender behaviour, if I could call them offenders. As I said, it may not necessarily relate to actual substantive offences, but we'll call them offenders. There's a number of things that can be going on with them that need to be considered, and that is the effect of drugs, alcohol, mental health issues, which can be a disinhibitor that, you know, otherwise they may not wish or choose to do the behaviour they would do otherwise, but for the presence of those factors. Another one is the heat of the moment, spur of the moment, incident and decision. So whilst we can plan and we can have all sorts of sound strategies, we very much need to be aware of these types of factors which can creep in. And of course, that is the lead in to say that you know, that the solutions to crime and the approaches to crime prevention are many, many faceted. No one particular aspect has the answer to everything. So, you know, there's a world of partnerships and collaboration to be had in the world of crime prevention. Some of the ongoing challenges we have is the challenge we face is to continually engage with the decision makers and professional groups, because we need to encourage them to make their decisions and apply their skills and knowledge through the lens of community safety and crime prevention. And that's why ongoing engagement is crucial. Ongoing marketing of the community safety message is vital to our decision makers. We need to make CPTED and community safety an intrinsic part of the way we do business instead of an add-on. And it harks back to my comments about guidelines versus legislation. We need to maintain an engagement with and understanding of our community. You know, the community is made up of many, many facets. So we need to be aware of what is going on in our particular community. Everything is about context. We need to promote the understanding that crime prevention is not just the responsibility of the crime prevention people. Everyone has a responsibility in crime prevention. We all have part to play, some more than others, and some more perhaps identifiable than others, but we all have a role to play. And lastly, avoid the tick in the box approach to when we're looking at community safety and crime prevention issues. Always remember the context. I'd just like now to take you through just a number of photographs that I've taken. I had a look the other day, and I think I've got something like 8,000 photographs now. So I won't show you 8,000. We don't have time, but I've just made a couple of selections here. I'd like to talk with you through over the next 4 or 5 minutes. An interesting thing about CPTED is that there's an encouragement to question everything, no matter how seemingly trivial. And when we look at the world through the eyes or the lens of community safety and crime prevention, quite often we see things that aren't actually crime issues, but they're safety issues. So here we have an example of a retrofit to a building, a facade. And part of the structure of that facade is actually a metal post, which is in the centre of the pedestrian crossing. Such a problem to the extent it actually has padding duct taped. This particular area is a nighttime economy area, black painted posts, nighttime, and people were running into the posts. So not crime, but be aware that you will find community safety issues. We need to consider in our design decisions, opportunities for crime or disorder, social disorder to exist. So out of the way places, out of sight, not controlled, retrofits to particular facilities, as is the case on the right-hand side there. What was once an open street now has a freeway flyover. So now what was once open is now actually a very constricted, narrow walkway. This is a photo. Actually, I was in Singapore running a workshop at this time last year, and Singapore is a beautiful place. But it's amazing when you look around, you find things. And in this case, near the hotel where I was staying, there was these electrical boxes. And because, think of the context, these structures provide masking of toilet activities after hours, people coming out of the nightclub. So we have a situation here where a decision is made to put in a facility, but it actually creates a problem all of its own. Okay, one of the ways to show or show what is expected in a location is through the provision of signage. But signage is far, far more than words on a board. For signage to be effective, it needs to be correctly sited, appropriately scaled, correctly oriented. It needs to be legible. It needs to be credible, because there needs to be an indicator that it will be enforced, and it needs to be capable of being understood by all. And you can see my friend, the emu there, a friend of mine sent me that photo. The emu is reading the warning sign about emus roaming the park. So the use of pictograms is one way to get the message across. Signage can facilitate wayfinding. Signage can facilitate orientation. It can indicate the direction of help. It can provide warnings, but it needs to be credible, as the top right-hand photograph there shows, that if the sign says that surveillance cameras are operating, if that's been tagged in graffitis, there's no credible deterrence in relation to that sign. Sometimes some of the old photos are the best. This is one I took in Western Queensland in Australia quite a number of years ago. And the design objective here, if you can see the arrow pointing to the rocks on the ground there, was to stop the police officers parking their cars on the grass. But effectively what it's doing, it's actually providing a tool and a weapon for willful damage or assaults. So sometimes conscious decisions are made, but it hasn't been fully thought through. Quite often, the nature of a location will give an indicator as to what behaviour is required at that particular place. Can be places of cultural significance. Also, markings, the delineation or transition zones between public space, semi-private and private can be used to show ownership and control and give the message that people are transitioning from public space and the activities that are permitted there into the private domain. And of course, changes can exist over time. Same location, problem there with people loitering and drinking alcohol outside a bank, creating problems for the customers. And the retrofit afterwards was to open up the corner and take away the seating. So Shamia, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, John. Always a pleasure having you speak at our CPTED seminars. Again, thank you very much. I'm sure most of us who have been paying attention to what John has been sharing would definitely agree to some of the points that are shared, especially when it comes to some of the examples given on signage and how that helps reduce antisocial behavior as well. There are some questions coming in. Please do keep them coming in, but we will answer those questions at the end of our webinar. We've just got one more presentation. That would be myself. Of course, my resume is nowhere as long as my brother Dr. Jerry and my brother John over here. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but just very quickly, just a quick introduction. My name is Shamir Rajadure. I am from Malaysia. And one of the things that I do is, of course, crime prevention, but also my area of focus is specifically more towards understanding crime from a criminal's perspective. That's where I conduct most of my research. So I understand it from their perspective and we come up with very practical solutions. So just to go into what we've been doing, we are going to talk about, of course, the street crime aspect of things. My brother John has covered the antisocial behavior. I will be talking about the street crime aspect of things. As part of the International CPTED Association, we are going to look at it from a CPTED perspective. So Two things which we are going to focus on a bit more would be, one would be snatch theft, and two, which is motorcycle theft or vehicle theft. These are the two main crimes which are mainly very prevalent in most nations and very, very prevalent in Asia especially. So let's talk about, since it is the COVID season, let's talk about what has happened to street crime in that period of time. One is that it has very positively affected street crime. There has been a reduction between 40 to 60% in most Asian countries. I believe in the Philippines alone, there was a 57% decrease. Malaysia was very close to that, and so as some other Asian countries. Now, but of course, with the reduction of street crime, cybercrime has tremendously increased. Yeah, but that would be another topic by itself. But we have had a webinar on COVID and how CPTED applies to it. Please do check out the CPTED website, the International CPTED Association website. We will be sharing the website soon. There was a webinar, in fact, two-part series of it. So please do check it out. It's very interesting because a lot of questions that came in were asking about CPTED during the COVID season. So please do check it out. Very interesting webinar by amazing speakers. So please do check that out. All right, just to move on a bit more. So basically, street crime contributes between 60 to 70% of index crime in most countries. So that is why we are going to highlight this very much. Okay, so just to go back a little bit, why do people commit street crime? The first is easy cash, and this is mainly based on my interviews with a lot of criminals. It's mainly quick, fast cash. That's what they want. Two, it's for the thrill of it. Some people get this real excitement when they are committing street crime. There's this real rush, adrenaline, and it keeps them pumped up. It's like a drug to them, so they keep doing it. But of course, it's also for easy cash. It's their way of surviving, which of course most of us don't agree with. But also another thing which contributes a lot to street crime is that our town planning departments have not incorporated CPTED properly. There are incorporations of CPTED, but I think it has probably lacked certain aspects, and we will be talking about it today. Okay, so the first thing, let's talk about snatch theft. One of the most common things which are happening in Asia, and this mainly happens due to lack of proper pedestrian walkway. So we will be looking into some designs of it. Just to show you what snatch theft looks like. Okay, this is what snatch theft could lead to. As you can see, motorcycles come, snatch the bag, and of course, this not only you not only lose your belongings, but sometimes, as you can see, you are going to get severely injured due to these incidences, right? So this is why it is very, very important that we address this issue. Okay, so one of the main contributors is due to the proper pedestrian walkways. So first of all, pedestrian walkways which are properly designed, not only does it encourage legitimate users, but also encourages natural surveillance. As we've understood, like what John and Dr. Jerry has shared, natural surveillance is one of the basic concepts of CPTED, right? This mainly helps by improving blind spots and corners, which by using lighting or street mirrors, one of the ways of improving it. This is an example of a bad design of pedestrian walkway. One of the other concepts or basic principles of CPTED is maintenance and management. And obviously this has no maintenance and management at all. So when you have shrubs or just bushes like this just growing without any form of maintenance and management, what happens now? The legitimate users cannot use this walkway. They end up walking on the street, which, as you've seen in the video before this, ends up with snatch theft, them becoming victims of snatch theft. Okay. This is a reasonably good design, but could be better. There's a lot of greenery and a very small walkway. The walkway could have been bigger. I'm going to give you an example of a very good walkway design. In fact, this is an example of a very good walkway design. During the night, this place is actually lit up pretty well. What they've done is they've actually put lightings on the trees. So it's actually very well lit at night. So it's very safe. People feel very safe. Of course, that helps reduce the fear of crime as well of the users within this space. Okay, so one of the ways, of course, as we've seen in the picture before, is by using shrubs or barriers. Okay, so what is the main function of a shrub or barrier? One is, of course, it is mainly designed for people walking too close to the side of the street. Okay, this helps reduce snatch theft or robbery. Okay, so because when you are walking too close to the side of the street, it's easy for people to just come snatch your bag. But if you have this distance now, which is created, it reduces the risk of that happening. And another thing would be, this is just some simple guidelines. It should be no higher than 3 feet, also to help create natural surveillance. And it should be between 2 to 3 feet width and wide. Okay, and sometimes there's a question: is it better to use a metal barrier, green shrubs, or bollards? Well, it always depends on the design of the space. Like what John shared earlier as well, different spaces should have different designs. Same thing. So it always depends on the architecture as well, and what would you prefer. And also what's important is to first analyze what type of crime is in the area, who is committing those crimes. Once we understand that, we will know which one would be the best used for that space. Okay, but also what's very important is that we have a gap in between those shrubs or barriers every 10 meters or so. In case there is a victim, this gives them the space to escape in case of an emergency. I'm going to give you a very good example. Why? This is an example of one of the cities in Malaysia. They have placed railing all the way from point A to point B. Okay, the problem with this is that just say someone comes and tries to rob somebody near point A. My only mode of escape now is to run all the way to point B. And that alone is probably going to be so difficult, you might have already become a victim. This is another design in one of the areas we consulted on. And this shows an amazing use of a breakage in between every 10 meters or so. This allows victims to escape in case they need to do so, right? So these are examples of some good designs which have been appropriate and works in these spaces, right? Okay, I'm going to show you what happens when there is no shrubs or barriers. I do hope the video is playing well. It's a bit blurred, but yeah. Okay, so that's an example of how snatch theft happens or robberies happens when there is no shrub or barrier, right? So going on, we're going to go a bit into motorcycle theft. And one of the things which happens is the main reason why motorcycles get stolen is because their designated parking space is usually in between alleys or at the back of it, because usually they feel the main space should be given to cars or motor vehicles, but motorcycles have always been pushed to the side or at the back, and this pushes them away from any form of natural surveillance, right? So one of the best ways to reduce motorcycle theft is actually to provide motorcycle locking docks, and the parking space should actually be visible from the front of a building. Again, going back to the basic concept of natural surveillance. Okay, and lighting plays a very, very big factor in any sort of crime prevention module. So please remember the lighting is very, very important, right? This, of course, helps reduce the fear of crime as well when there is proper lighting. Okay, I'm just going to give an example. This is an example of bad lighting. What's interesting is that even though there's nothing that's blocking the lighting, but because of the types of light which they chose, it actually gives a very eerie feeling. It might seem bright in this image, but that's because we actually had to enhance the image and the lighting in the image. But if not, it is actually very, very dark. Okay. This is another one why it is very important to always be, CPTED always requires different agencies to work together. So landscape architecture and M&E always need to work together, because as we can see in this picture over here, landscape has done a good job. M&E has done their job and put a lighting pole over there. But the problem is we cannot see where the pole is. And what happens in this area at night is that actually, because of the trees, the branches of the trees are so big, it actually prevents the light from actually illuminating the whole area. So this is an example why different agencies need to work together coherently in order to reduce street crime. Okay, so lighting plays a very, very big role. Okay, these are examples of, so what they've done over here is that they've provided a motorcycle parking space, but you have to bring your own padlock. Okay, and what happens is that nobody uses it because it is, they feel it doesn't work in the long run. This is an example of a proper locking door. It's designed specifically for motorcycles, and that helps actually reduce crime tremendously. In fact, what happened is that the Petaling Jaya Municipal Council, that is MPPJ in Malaysia, actually worked together with us, and we designed a motorcycle parking space and a motorcycle parking door, and that actually reduced motorcycle theft in that pilot project area by 32% in a year. So this just goes to show of how effective CPTED can be if it is applied properly. But again, every location is different because you have different people committing crime, different demographics living there, and different ways or modus operandi of committing this sort of crime. So remember, CPTED, even though it's a global concept, it always needs to be localized, right? So this was actually a very interesting question that came in earlier. So I just thought I wanted to highlight this and put it as part of my slide. Okay. Can CPTED be applied in less income households or neighborhoods, less income neighborhoods? Because we always hear CPTED being applied in maybe the more posh areas or the more wealthy neighborhoods. But what about the less income neighborhoods? Can it actually be applied? Actually, it can. One of the concepts of CPTED is actually community participation. So community building actually helps reduce crime. Get involved in any form of community building activity within the neighborhood, that actually helps. But the municipal council and the government and also the local authority and the neighborhoods need to play their part in making this happen. Okay? So one of the ways is that to help beautify the neighborhood. Most of us have heard about the broken window theory, right? And of course, when a neighborhood looks good, crime happens less in the neighborhood. Whereas if it's not well kept, the concept of the broken window, people are just going to continuously commit crime. Or antisocial behavior is just going to develop in the neighborhood because nobody cares enough in the neighborhood. So in municipal council, one of the things which are done in Malaysia is that the municipal council actually gives a small fund to neighborhood communities to actually beautify their neighborhood, right? Every year they provide a small fund, and that helps with beautifying the neighborhood, just to show that the neighborhood care. And in fact, there was a very good success story in an area in Malaysia as well. Every month, they used to have about 30 motorcycle thefts in this low-cost apartment. And what they did, they said one day, enough is enough. The community teamed up with the municipal council. They beautified the neighborhood, did up the lighting, repainted certain spaces, put a bit of landscaping around the area. And now they have a maximum of maybe 2 motorcycle thefts a month. Imagine from 30, it has dropped to just 2. So this is just examples of how, again, effective CPTED can be when it is applied right. Yeah. So I've come to very close to the end of my presentation. Just a very quick summary just before I end. Okay, so first of all, again, CPTED needs to be catered based on the potential crime. Please do not copy and paste. That's very important. It's important to build proper walkways to reduce snatch theft, and lighting and visibility is important, very important in reducing vehicle theft. And not only that, but also to reduce the fear of crime. And of course, the best part about all this is always best to consult with a certified CPTED practitioner so that no assumptions about CPTED are made along this concept. So yeah, so I've come to the end of my presentation. We are going to open it up to Q&A. In fact, if anybody would like to get in touch with the International CPTED Association, you can go over to our website, cpted.net, or you can also find us on LinkedIn, and you can find me on LinkedIn, John on LinkedIn, and even Dr. Jerry on LinkedIn. Please feel free to get in touch with any of us, right? So we are going to open up the Q&A, but before we do that, there's been quite a bit of questions about certain things. One is that if you would like to view certain CPTED videos, especially the past videos, please do go on to our website, www.cpted.net. Do check out the website. We also have a website for a YouTube channel for CPTED related topics. So please do check out our YouTube link, CPTED Talks. The link is here. Please feel free to look it up. I will share it in the group in a while. And also there's another one on Facebook, myself and a few others do it. It's called Crime, Crooks and Criminology. Please do check them out. And if you'd like to learn more about CPTED, become a member, there are many benefits to it as we played the video in the first part. Please again go on to our website, cpted.net/membership, and do check out the procedure over there. If you have any questions, feel free to just drop us an email. Our email address is there. We'll be more than happy to assist. So now I'm going to open it up to the Q&A part. We are going to take some questions. Please do let the questions drop in, and we are going to answer them as well as we can. Myself, Dr. Jerry, and John will answer these questions, as many as we can. Okay. So, where shall we start? Okay. Okay, so there's a question here. What is snatch theft? Is it grabbing a purse or backpack of a person as you run or bike by them? Okay, I think in Asia, this is a very common thing which happens. So we are very familiar probably with the term. I think especially our international friends, seeing those videos of how snatch theft happens might have been a bit of an eye-opener to them. But let me just further explain what snatch theft is. Basically, two things. One is either you're on foot or on your motor vehicle, and somebody just snatches your bag, handbag, laptop bag, your phone, and speeds off with it. So that's one part of it. What mainly snatch theft consists of. Okay. There was a question earlier. Does urban planning affects? What does urban planning affects in the commission of crime? Maybe John, you would like to take that. Many years experience in the police force.
Sorry, Shamir, can I just have that question?
Does urban planning, what are the urban planning effects in the commission of crime?
Well, I suppose if we look at the basis of CPTED is that proper design and effective use of the built environment reduces the risk and the opportunity for crime. So, you know, urban design and planning, it has a role in mitigating the risk of crime. And sometimes because the way the world has changed, facilities are as they are, there are crime problems surrounding them. So it's sort of recognising the risks that exist now because of planning decisions that have been made in the past or usages have changed, but it's also being aware of the benefits of considering crime prevention and community safety before we start putting in place facilities and doing planning and having it as part of that broad consultation and appreciation of how to move forward safely and securely.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I hope that answers the questions for everyone. There was another question. Do you think that architecture and engineering has something to do with safety? I think actually I do believe CPTED is basically architecture designing, using architecture to design safe cities. Engineering plays a very big factor. Like what I mentioned earlier, a lot of these departments need to work together in order for CPTED to be effective. We cannot just leave CPTED to the police just because it's crime prevention. Oh, it's a police job. No, it's not. Every department, the municipal council, architects, engineers, all of them need to work together. Even landscaping needs to work together. Communities, CPTED practitioners, the police, everyone needs to work together in order for CPTED to be effective. If not, it's just one person implementing something that's not going to be effective on the long run. Yeah. There were some questions which were actually posted to us earlier. John, would you like to address any of them?
Sorry, I'll turn my microphone on. My apologies. A question here a little bit close to home in my my adopted new state in Australia. How could CPTED training be better available to and valued by Victoria Police? Look, that's a huge question. My experience through my years of policing is that sometimes there needs to be a recognition that crime prevention, even within a police service, because a police service generally is the lead agency in crime prevention, sometimes even within an organisational context like that, crime prevention becomes the domain of the crime prevention people. So there needs to be, I suppose, an organisational focus on prevention. There needs to be a motivation within an organisation to look at different strategies and revisit them. You know, my experience has been that sometimes crime prevention strategies sort of they tend to sort of fade in and fade out. Sometimes that's because it's been driven by the personality of the person who's been driving it, so that, you know, when that person goes away, they're promoted or move on, sometimes the impetus isn't there. So the other big one, of course, is budget. You know, who's paying for this is obviously one of the great questions that's asked in every organisation, not the least of which are police services. So it's a multifaceted thing. Organisational focus, the operational tempo of that organisation, and what capacity they, you know, how they're being pulled in many different directions, but also budget. So it's a complex question, a somewhat complex answer.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question. Since public spaces like sidewalks are designed for the use of all members of the public, how do we determine what is legitimate use versus an illegitimate use?
Would you like me to take that one, Shamir?
Yes, I will, yeah, please do, and I'll just probably add on a little bit after that.
Sure, no worries. Look, I think it probably harks back to my comments before, that a little bit of eye of the beholder. Different people, different groups within communities, different cultures, they all use space differently. And sometimes that usage can be misunderstood, misinterpreted. Some people may wish to exert control over certain groups by making complaints about behaviour. So it's not necessarily so clear that crossover. You know, at either extreme, it's probably fairly easy to determine what is illegitimate and what's legitimate. It's that bit in the middle where there's a crossover of an appreciation of culture and understanding of how people use a space. I suppose sort of at a basic level, a basic rule of thumb is that what was the place intended to be used for, who is using it, and what effect, particularly negative effects, is that behaviour having on those people for which the place was intended or designed for. So, you know, there'll never be the textbook answer that this is the delineation between legitimate and illegitimate. It's that bit in the middle that we actually have to give a lot of consideration to say, well, what are we actually doing here? Are we being equitable? Are we involving the community or parts of the community instead of excluding them? So, yeah, not a simple answer, very, very much based on context.
Thank you very much, John. There was another question here, but wouldn't there be a risk with allowing victims to escape onto the main street? They might be hit by fast-moving traffic, especially if they are running away. I think this would relate back to what I shared earlier, that we should have gaps in between our designs of the walkway. Well, again, this goes back to the understanding of crime within this part of the region, I guess. One of the things is that we need to understand, probably did not explain this very well earlier, is that when snatch up happens, especially in these type of spaces, it's usually not in spaces where there is a free flow of traffic. It's usually within spaces where there are traffic jams. And the difference between the motorcycles here in Asia in comparison to maybe other parts of the world is that our bikes are actually smaller in capacity, smaller in cc. So it's very easy for them to weave through traffic. So what they usually do is that they wait for there to be a traffic jam before they strike, because then no one is going to be able to catch up with them. So to have those gaps wouldn't actually be a bad idea, but again, we might not be able to mitigate every risk, but this is just one of the ways to reducing snatch time. Okay. Another question. We have an increase of swarming offences in Victoria, Australia, where multiple offenders enter the department store and steal Apple products and electric devices. Is this common internationally, and how do we tackle this issue? Well, it's not common internationally. We don't have issues like that over here in my part of the world. But I've seen videos of things that are happening overseas as well. John, maybe you'd like to address this with your experience in the police force?
Yeah, look, obviously a complex issue, which I've sort of been aware of following news and commentary such like. Look, I suppose one of the issues we're dealing here with is what is it that the people are trying to attain? So perhaps there's a degree of target hardening in terms of those things. But of course, the challenge there, of course, is that you're in a commercial environment or retail environment where you need to provide access to things. So that's the sort of the dual-edged sword there, that you're looking to try and restrict as you can access to certain items, but you want to have them out so people can buy them. Tied in with that, of course, is the issue of access control. So modern shop designs have changed around a little bit, not necessarily always do we have now the point of sale, the point of control of entry and exit right at the front door of retail premises. Sometimes it's inside. So sometimes it's difficult to actually identify that actually a problem is about to walk in the door towards you. And also if people are starting to exit with property. And of course, there's the shock value that these sorts of activities, they overwhelm any sort of potential response that's taking place at that particular time. So I suppose it's an excess of, it's a mix of sort of target hardening as best we can, commensurate with the retail environment, but also look at aspects of access control. And then once again, this is where we're getting into sort of the technical aspect where, things like CCTV coverage, it may not necessarily prevent the offence taking place, but, good quality CCTV can actually record and assist with the identification and prosecution of offenders downstream.
Thank you very much. There's another question over here. Is there any connection between quality of life and crime rates in certain places? Actually, yes, I believe there is, again, depending on the region and also the type of, that's why we say, that's why we always say you cannot copy and paste CPTED into another neighborhood, because every neighborhood has a different quality of life, different crime rates, and that affects the crime in the area tremendously. I think if we look at just Malaysia alone, a neighboring, maybe the neighborhood right next to mine as well, crime rates are different. So because you have a different demographic staying there, you have a different, I would say, salary margin staying in those areas as well. And that really affects the type of crime that is committed in these spaces. I've interviewed many criminals, and we always see the difference in the neighborhood and the types of crime which is committed in the neighborhoods, and why they do it as well. So this will actually be a very long conversation, but feel free to drop us a text or email after this. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Another question as well. Let's see. As community safety officers, we spend a lot of time on physical risk mitigations when investing in community safety. How do we complement that work with educational programs? Do we have a case study of where education and practical mitigations have been successful? I'll just answer this, and I'm sure John would have something to add on. When it comes to educational programs, I always believe there's always some sort of positive reaction to it, and it does help reduce crime on the long run. One of the main reasons when I sit down with victims and always ask them, why do you think you became a victim? They always say this: I did not know that was a crime technique. So once they understand how crime happens, it makes it easier for them to take the precautionary measures they need, or to also participate in the community building processes and the CPTED effectiveness within that area, the CPTED practices within that area. John, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just in terms of educational programs within the community, obviously educating the community about crime prevention strategies and measures that they can take is really very important. We live in a 24/7 news cycle now where how many times did that offence actually take place? We're seeing it in our feed constantly. So sometimes the actuality of crime can be much greater than the reality of the crime. So therefore we can have things like avoidance of areas, perceptual matters, that if I perceive a place to be unsafe, I don't go there. Some of the strategies used in terms of a victim focus can be community awareness programs. There's a usage of things that include such things as the don't message, don't do certain things. That needs to be implemented with some care so that we're not seen to be blaming victims. And it's also very interesting in terms of the market we're dealing with when we're talking about community education. one of the things I did in Queensland Police was I introduced a concept called tourist-oriented policing. It existed in other parts of the world, but Queensland, Australia, major tourist destination, and the tourism industry and policing organisations are not necessary, well, they're allies, but one tends to be bad news for the other, and that's usually the police, because, you know, the tourism industry promotes positivity and a safe environment. Police, when they get involved, there's some connotation of things going wrong. So in terms of what we did with the introduction of tourist-oriented policing and community education was to promote the positive. So Queensland, Australia is a safe destination, but you will have a better time if you do certain things. So it was promoting the positive, sort of gaining consensual compliance that people believed there was a better outcome for them if they actually did something, opposed to not doing things.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we have time for maybe 3 more questions. What is the interesting question? What can be done regarding recent changes in local laws? For example, city, local municipal councils often have little control over their provisional state federal laws. Rollback or laws on the introduction of new measures can often overwhelm the ability of councils to respond quickly or develop census. What's recommended during the period of rapid change? Well, actually, this is interesting for me because over here we don't have that issue. If the municipal council or the federal state implements a law, they actually have a lot of control over these laws. Instead of, it's interesting that you mentioned maybe in your part of the world is that they have little control over those provisional states. So I am not too sure how this, because I have no experience in this. John, do you have any experience in this?
Yeah, just restate that for me again, Shamia. Sorry, the audio went.
Not a problem. I'm going to paste it in the group so everyone can see it. Yeah, that's the question. Can you see it, John?
Okay. Yep. Got it. I suppose there's nothing more certain than change in our environment. Just when we think we're comfortable with something, the world changes around us, and different organisations have different roles to play, but they all come together in the same space, and sometimes different organisations all sort of think they're heading in the same directions, but sometimes there can be sort of slight variations that can have an impact on the business of others. So, look, all I can say is that there is nothing more certain than change. So that's why sort of ongoing engagement with all of the partner agencies that you dealt with that can have an impact on your business is really, really vital. You know, you can plan sometimes the best you can, and sometimes things come out of left field that, you know, you have to deal with at the time. But that maintaining that constant dialogue with players in your space, in your world, I think is vital to give you a cue for what's going to come through the door downstream, and then look to see how are we going to meet that, as opposed to surprise, look what's just happened.
Okay. Maybe one more question. There was a very interesting question here. Good morning, everyone. Does CPTED also help to prevent crimes, for example, drug trafficking, human exploitation, etc.? I think this, a lot of us are probably wondering this as well. But I think what John mentioned earlier was very interesting, and I think really applies to this, is that CPTED is part of a crime prevention jigsaw. It's not the main solution, it's part of it which helps reduce crime on the long run. I'll just share with you one of the ways that human trafficking was happening within our region was that they would come through the borders, right? And sometimes through the jungles and all that. Again, can you apply CPTED in jungle? Not so much. That's how it is. But I think what plays a part as well is the policies that we put in place, which slightly relates back to CPTED as well. So I'm not going to say that, yes, you apply CPTED, it's going to eradicate drug trafficking, human exploitation, but it does, to a slight extent, help with mitigating these sort of things and reducing certain parts of crime. Okay. I think it's, maybe you have time for one more question. Let's see.
I saw a question there, Shamia. If I saw a question here, I think it's scrolled past now, but essentially, if I can capture the thrust of it is that why don't insurance companies provide a policy reduction, policy amount reduction if businesses or employ CPTED or undertake sort of safety or risk audits within their business. That's probably not a bad idea. Look, I've been aware in the past, certainly in my policing experience, there were some government programs which provided it wasn't from the insurance side so much, but it was from a government side to provide some incentives to facilitate some crime prevention strategies. I know I was in charge of the Neighbourhood Watch program in Queensland for a couple of years, going back a few years ago, and we were fortunate in having an insurance company that was our corporate sponsor. So, you know, there were some degrees of insurance benefit for being part of a Neighbourhood Watch area.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, so we've come close to the end of it, and there are still many more questions. Please feel free to drop us an email, and whatever questions we can answer, we would definitely send you a reply. Myself and John will sit down and go through these questions. But before we end, very quickly, again, please do check out our website, CPTED.net, if you'd like to be a member, or if you, I've just shared the feedback form earlier. I really do hope you do click on that feedback form and give us the feedback. We would really, really appreciate on how we can make our webinars better. And also, if anyone's interested in any certification courses, feel free to join us as well, or check out our website, CPTED.net. Go on, just check it out. And also, yes, any questions, drop it in. Before I end, I would just like to thank everyone here for attending our webinar. Amazing response. We were really, really happy to see the number of participants today and those who registered as well. And also, before I end, I would just like to thank our partner for today, the PCAP, and Dr. Jerry J. Kano for helping out and also inviting everyone to join this. Thank you very much, brother. I would like to thank the International CPTED Association, and also what most people probably do not realize is that there's a lot of people working in the backgrounds over here and helping to make sure this runs smoothly. So thank you very much to the International CPTED Association, the webinar committee especially, for making sure everything goes very smoothly. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. And again, before we end, I just like to say thank you very much. We really appreciate everyone attending the workshop today, the webinar today. Take care and have a nice day ahead. Bye-bye.
Everybody, really appreciated it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you for spending time with us in this webinar.